All right, this is my multimedia presentation number 2. I'm going to be going over some of the concepts that we looked at this week. The first one is Wilson's dichotomy. This is the relationship between politics and administration. Wilson proposed that they are both inherently different and therefore needed to be separated and each go to their own strengths. It was one of the first checks and balances of power between politics and then the business that carries out what the politics and the policies decided was going to happen. An example of this in the public sector today is our city councilman and our city manager. So our city councilmen decide what's going on and what we need to change in the city, and then the city manager actually carries that out. Next is Taylor's scientific method management. This was the first person who really looked at the science of managing people. Before this, there wasn't really any standardization for work. Mr. No Good, Lazy Bottom, who was smoking cigarettes, was the example in one of the videos that I watched, was making the same wage as someone who was working really, really hard to get things done, and Taylor didn't think this was fair. This is where the idea came from, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. An example of this in today I thought would be like the library system, where we have employees that they have everything delegated into different sections. So like acquisitions, cataloging, circulation, tracking serial numbers, and like public interface. So the public library is most efficient when they have broken it up into these different areas with specialized workers to get things done as quickly as possible. Next is Gulak's POSDCORB. I didn't want to try to pronounce that. He wrote a paper in 1937 about this concept. This is also about delegating with subdivisions. Depending on size and the complexity of the enterprise, there would be more or less divisions. This is all about placing workers who work well under a certain manager. So it was all about trying to get a clear idea of what was going on with the worker and what the worker needs to get done, and putting that worker in the place where he'd be most productive. And an example of this in today's public sector I thought would be like committees and subcommittees, how we divide. The government will decide that something needs to be done in technology. So they'll go to the technology committee, and that committee will decide, okay, well, to get that accomplished, we need to do A, B, and C. And then A will go to a subcommittee, B will go to a subcommittee, and C will go to a subcommittee. Next is Weber's bureaucracy. This is often looked down upon in society nowadays. But originally Weber theorized that this was the most efficient way to things get done. It's pretty inflexible to individuals because it sets up clear policy that needs to be followed in a chain of command, and it needs to be signed by this person, then this person, then this person before it actually comes into action. So it's usually a little bit slower than things, but there is in my opinion, I think it's a good, it has its strength in that there's a paper trail of everything that's going on. So when something goes wrong or a policy doesn't work out, it can be traced all the way back and figure out where it went wrong and where it can be fixed. I think a good example of this is the DMV. If you don't make an appointment, you wait in line. Once you get to the front of the line, that person tells you that, oh, you need to be in this line. Oh, you didn't fill out this paperwork. And you're there all day trying to figure out this puzzle of how to just get your license renewed. And I think that's one of the main criticisms that people have with a bureaucracy. Next is Follet's leadership. This woman was really cool. She was a social worker, she was a philosopher, she was a management consultant, and people call her the pioneer in the organizational theory and behavior. Some people even went as far as called her a guru in this area. She also coined the term win-win philosophy and conflict resolution. So she was trying to create like an ethically designed process to improve social conditions for people, not only just in society, but in the workplace. I think an example of this in the public sector is citizens writing to state representatives about what we want to see changed or improved within our state. And then our representative takes that on to the next level and rallies for us to try to get things done. Lastly, we have Simon's bound rationality. This theory is all about human what's the word? Not human behavior, but the human thought process and how strongly we like will stick to something. He like thought that people couldn't process all the information even if they had access to it and like we're limited. But like we try to do the best that we can in our management and our work ethic, but sometimes it just doesn't add up, or sometimes we're limited by our abilities or our mentality or even our physical capabilities of what we can do. He came up with this term called satisficing, and those words that comes from the word satisfy and suffice. And that's like when I really wanted the white pair of Nikes in size 7.5 to buy, but they didn't have it in white, they have it in blue, but I really needed a pair of Nikes, so I'm gonna what's the word? I'm going to like settle for buying the blue Nikes instead. Um, so oftentimes, even though it's not exactly what we want, sometimes we'll settle, and that's a common human behavior. I thought that picture at the bottom of the granola bar with chocolate chips and then the chocolate bar, it's like was really funny to illustrate this point. Was, sometimes like if you didn't have the chocolate bar, that granola bar with chocolate in it will satisfy that craving for chocolate, so they'll eat that if they don't have the chocolate. An example, I think, in the public sector of this was a crisis that we had this past week going on with the budget. Congress wasn't happy with the budget that we had proposed, or not we, the Republican Party had proposed, and so they didn't pass it. And so they went back, tried to rewrite it, and it may not have been the optimum budget plan that Congress wanted, but it was satisfactory enough to pass it. So that ended that crisis. All in all, these were really interesting topics to explore. I thought it was very interesting this week, the changes that have happened in the last century, with with the way that we deal with business and get things done, and just how that's been a whole struggle for the last couple hundred years. So thank you for listening to my presentation.